Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you will be listening to this talk on the story of teaching English in India. I am Krishna Swami, former professor, Central Institute of English, that later became the Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages, and now called English and Foreign Languages University. I have had a lot of experience in the field of English teaching in India, maybe for more than 60 years or so. I have worked on several projects in states like Rajasthan, Gujarat, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, and Tamil Nadu on several projects. I have written more than 70 books and published about 40 or 45 articles. I have worked with teacher trainers, teachers, British Council experts, and students. I know the ground realities in India. My books are widely used in many universities and colleges. Let me start with my personal experience. In one of the state universities in Tamil Nadu, my wife and I trained a group of affiliated college teachers with the help of the Department of English in the university. And we produced a textbook for teaching English at the undergraduate level. The book contains more or less about 1/4 of its communication skills, dialogues in situations, tongue twisters for speech practice, general knowledge, and so on. Another 1/4 of the book contains situational grammar or applied grammar, where one category of grammar is used in life situations. And the remaining part of the book contains stories and passages from India, and some part of it contains global literature, not just Western literature. The book was printed by a well-known publisher, Bloomsbury, and it was used in all the affiliated colleges of the university. About 40,000 copies were sold in 1 year. It was well received by the student. The students enjoyed using the book. The external examiners liked the answers given by the students. And the results also showed remarkable improvement. So it was quite an effective book. But what happened the next year? The Board of Studies met, and the members of the Board of Studies met the Vice Chancellor and told him, we don't want to use the book prepared by the teachers. We find it very difficult. We want to teach Shakespeare, Milton, Shelley, and such texts. Not that our teachers are all Shakespeare scholars and they enjoy reading original Shakespeare plays. The answer is very obvious and simple. The teachers can go to the class go on lecturing and lecturing and lecturing on Shakespeare and Shelley and mystify whatever they say, and the students will be wondering how such a small head can carry all they knew. That is the main reason. In another instance, I was asked to give a talk at the Academic Staff College in a central university, and I started my lecture with some extracts from Macaulay's famous Minute of 1835, the very foundation for teaching English in India. But the participants did not want to listen to anything critical of the existing system, whether it is Macaulay or someone, because probably they find it convenient to go on with the existing system. You know, academic staff college lectures are meant for entertainment and not for any serious work. In the third instance, I was giving a lecture at the RIE Bangalore on how to find alternatives in teaching English. I gave a number of examples and told them about the advantage of teaching English based on our own texts and our own stories, because India is the birthplace of all stories. At the end of the talk, a participant stood up and said, "There is a lot of humanism in Shakespeare. Why not we teach Shakespeare?" Then I asked her, "Is there no humanism in our own Indian literatures? Is humanism found only in the small island that looted us for more than 150 years and killed many Indians?" So incidentally, the word loot is also looted from an Indian language. She was not convinced. Mahatma Gandhi said, "We can keep our doors and windows open, but we cannot allow our ceiling to be blown off." But we don't want to listen to all that. That is our mindset. I have read many articles on education, on English teaching in the journals published in India. All the quotations are from Western sources. Only Western authors are mentioned. Maybe one or two Indian names, somebody working in some foreign university, or someone who has got a British connection, like the British Council. Even after so many years of independence, we think that English can be taught only through Western literature. I distinctly remember a poem by Keats, La Belle Dame Sans Merci. This is a favorite in all our anthologies. Unfortunately, most of the teachers cannot pronounce even the title of the poem. I have heard teachers pronouncing Bella, Belly, and so on. How do we expect our students to react to the poetic beauty in such a poem where Keats is obsessed with love and death? Don't you think it is ridiculous to expect our students in the rural areas, semi-urban areas, and even in some of the urban areas? But if you take a story like Vikram and Betal, the students can very easily understand the content of the text they emotionally can interact with it. And at the end of each story, there is a riddle. And students start giving different answers to the riddle. There's a lot of interaction in the class. As a result, a lot of learning takes place. But teachers don't want this kind of material because they have to read the text, prepare the lesson plan and all that, and they have to do a lot of homework. This involves work. They don't want to do it. Paradoxically, recently a report appeared in the Hindu. A group of Cambridge University students in England approached the faculty of English in the department of the university. They wanted the syllabus to be decolonized and a number of non-white authors to be included in the syllabus. The students in England are asking for it. But we do not want to change our syllabus. That is our mindset. Anyway, the teaching of English in India starts with the East India Company in 1600 and with a blueprint prepared by Charles Grant in 1792. As it is well known, the famous Macaulay's Minute of 1835, famous or infamous, is the manifesto of English teaching in India. Macaulay clearly states the objectives of teaching English in India, a well-known passage. I quote, "We must at present form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern, a class of persons whom we govern, a class of persons, Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, and in morals, and in intellect. To that class, we may leave it to redefine the vernacular dialects of the country." In other words, they wanted a class of bureaucrats and clerks. Now, incidentally, the etymology for the word vernacular, domestic, indigenous, it comes from the French root verna, homeborn slave. Macaulay abuses Indian literature and Indian knowledge systems. But his style is very unique, a model for English prose. I quote, "A single shelf of a good European library was worth the whole native literature of India and Arabia. It seems all the perfumes of Arabia cannot sweeten our own literature." Notice how the word native is used in two different ways. When we talk about the natives of India, it has got a negative meaning. When we talk about the native speakers of English, it has got a positive meaning. Anyway, Macaulay further adds that India has medical doctrines which would disgrace an English furrier, astronomy which would move laughter in the girls of an English boarding school, history abounding with kings 30 feet high and reigns 30,000 years, and geography made up of seas of treacle and seas of butter. Excellent English. But what about the content? Now, at least Macaulay's English, I would say, is a model for English prose worth reading. Not like Winston Churchill, who once said, I hate Indians. They are beastly people with a beastly religion. They are breeding like rabbits. I think that is enough of Macaulay. Let me point out some very little or unknown facts. The first textbook for teaching English in India, teaching English anywhere in the third world, outside Europe, was prepared in India in Bengal by John Miller in 1797. It was published in Serampur in Bengal, printed by the author himself. It is called The Tutor, or a New English Bengali work, New English and Bengali work, well adapted to teach the natives English. The first known example of teaching English in the third world. The first grammar book for colonial India was written by J.C. Nesfield and published in 1898. It's called the Manual of English Grammar and Composition. Based on that book, another very popular book, High School English Grammar and Composition, written or supposed to have been written by Wren and Martin, was published in 1935. Though there are many grammar mistakes in that book, it became very popular in India and Pakistan. After Macaulay's Minute, 3 universities were started in India: Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta. In 1857, the year of the Great Mutiny, called Sepoy Mutiny by the British, English literature was first introduced in India. English as the medium of instruction and also a subject of study. Before it was introduced in England, British colonialism used India to formulate teaching devices and testing techniques. In England, Greek was the classical language. Latin was the language of religion and the church. French was the court language. English was only a vernacular, like Indian languages were called vernaculars in British India. Oxford and Cambridge did not allow the subject of English literature till the end of the 19th century. Literature at that time in England meant only the study of great books, Greek and Latin, and not a mere chatter about Shelley. India was a trial ground, and Indian students were guinea pigs. Oxford allowed English as a subject of study in 1894 and Cambridge in 1911, but it was introduced in India in 1857. The teaching of English in India was started at the university level, at the ceiling. The school levels were not seriously taken, and primary education was completely ignored. So there was no foundation for teaching English. Elementary education was totally ignored. Macaulay himself, as a member of the Governor General's Council, prepared some readers. The standard syllabus at that time was political selections by Goldsmith, Gray, Shakespeare, Milton's Paradise Lost, the first 4 books, Pope's Iliad by Homer, Shakespeare's plays Hamlet, Othello, and Macbeth, Addison's essays, Johnson's Lives of the Poets, Goldsmith's History of England, Bacon's essays, and the prose readers prepared by Macaulay himself. Even today, the same tradition continues. The missionaries who did not like the secular syllabus of the government included the Bible, Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, Plato's Dialogues, but they removed Addison, Johnson, and Pope. Even today, they continue more or less the same syllabus. We can see that most of the texts in the syllabus suggested even by the UGC or the state governments, I find even the CBSE textbooks, I find Shakespeare. I am not against Shakespeare. Shakespeare studies require a knowledge of English of the 16th century, a knowledge of the theatre at that time, the socio-cultural conditions in England of the 16th century, and even the life of Shakespeare himself. This is a specialized field. It is not meant for students at the UG level or even at the PG level. Our students at the UG level even today study the history of England, but they do not know the history of their own district. They do not know the history of the state or the country. But that is our fate. To cut the story short, look at the current situation even now. The current situation can be described in terms of 7 dichotomies, which I call the 7 sins of teaching English in India. In each category, one is privilege over the other. The first sin, we privilege Western literature over what they used to call vernacular literatures or Indian literatures now. The objectives of Macaulay that Indian colonial subjects should be educated through English and they should be humanized only through British literature because it was superior to the Indian languages and Oriental learning. Even today, we continue to privilege Western tradition, Western literature, Western knowledge systems. The teachers of English can easily reproduce Aristotle about the tragic hero and the tragic effect. But they know very little about our own tragic heroes like Ravan in the Ramayana, Karna in the Mahabharata, or Kovalan in Silappatikaram, a Tamil classic. The glorification of the Western literary tradition, at least in the case of Macaulay, it was clearly motivated by the colonial design. But in our case, it is based on conditioning and ignorance. For example, the professors of English in our universities, they know very little about Indian literatures and Indian knowledge systems. And in the pundits of Indian languages, they can't even speak proper English. So there is very little communication between the Department of English and the departments of Indian languages. There is a colonial divide. They are not even on speaking terms. As a result, the study of English literature, even Western literature, is rootless and solitary. Anyway, that is the condition. The second sin is we privilege canonical literature over non-canonical literature. Even within the Western literary tradition, we privilege only what has been approved as great literature. It has to be approved by critics. The emphasis on the classical approach in English studies in India is remarkable. It is not so even in other countries, in England or in the US. Particularly in the age of pop literature, pulp fiction, only Bacon, Shakespeare, Shelley, Keats, T.S. Eliot, Bernard Shaw, only such names are included in our syllabus. The result is only the teacher of English enjoys these things. He goes to the undergraduate class, falls upon the thorns of life and bleeds. Unfortunately, only the teacher of English bleeds. The students are busy with their own mobile phones because they cannot react to such poetic beauty. The growth of population, the growth of the middle class, the aspirations of the rural, semi-urban, even the urban poor, the lack of classical literary culture, a competitive society, the demands of the employment market, the growth of pulp fiction and pop literature, and such other factors have considerably changed the situation. Comic strips like Charlie Brown, Peanuts, Tarzan, Superman, Amar Chitra Katha, and Disney cartoons, all considered junk literature by the establishment. There are also magazines like Outlook, Reader's Digest, The Week, Young World, and many more. They have made the canonical literature more isolated. Many students in urban areas, they learn their English from Enid Blyton, Hardy Boys, Mills and Boone, Harry Potter, and such other books, and not from the English textbook. The third sin is we privilege the printed word over the spoken word and the visual world. Even within the canonical literary tradition, Western tradition, only the printed texts are prescribed. Rousseau says, writing is a dangerous supplement and a necessary evil. But in our educational institutions, only written texts are respected. Our syllabus makers would like to keep out all oral and visual forms. The exclusion of the oral and visual forms makes the study of literature even more rootless. We talk about the importance of spoken English, communication skills, but we totally ignore all the spoken forms and visual forms. There are films, TV programs, telefilms, media presentations, all these things are excluded. Jhampa Lagari's namesake, Khalid Hussain, Kite Runner, Malgudi Days, even many plays of Shakespeare, Attenborough's Gandhi, Nehru's Discovery of India, all are available on CDs, but we don't consider them real literature. In fact, there is a great job market for film critics, media programmers, news readers, but our curriculum makers are not sensitive to the dynamic world outside. The fourth sin is we always privilege literature over language. Ezra Pound says great literature is simply language, charged with meaning to the utmost possible degree. But unfortunately, there is a long slang-lit myth that has been created, and the study of language has been excluded from the study of literature. Language wallahs are looked down upon. There is a cell for language studies and a prison for literature in our universities. According to J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Lord of the Rings, he was a professor of English language and literature at Oxford. According to him, this separation is false. The right and natural sense of the word language includes literature, just as literature includes the study of language and literary works. This separation and exclusion is all just politics and nothing but politics. Very painful. The fifth sin that we are committing is we privilege critics over common readers. Critics are supposed to be super readers. They have to give approval to what is to be considered literature. Frank Kermode says, the world is full of literary critics. Some held to be very important who do nothing but literary criticism, and they are all in the universities. We are asked to reproduce what the critic says, and students cannot express their own opinion or interpretation. On the one hand, we talk about reader response theory, which says that every reader is a second author and producer, but the common reader is excluded from all literary studies, and only the established critic is privileged. The sixth sin is we privilege teachers over learners. The teacher, whether he or she teaches or not, excludes all learners and even learning from the classroom. Teachers, I would like to say, are great dictators because they dictate notes in the class. Just listen, don't talk, be silent, shut up. These are the things we hear. Don't question, don't think, be passive. I know of several instances where students were asked to leave the classroom because they were asking inconvenient questions. They were very inquisitive. The seventh sin is we privilege testing over teaching. As everybody knows, there is no teaching in the class. It's only Coaching. Coaching is very different from teaching. Even our universities and colleges have become coaching for the examination. They are coaching institutions. There is no teaching at all. Coaching, dictating notes, and reproduce them in the examination. The students are asked to take down the notes and reproduce them in the examination. Teaching is for life and coaching is only for the examination. A textbook is prescribed. It is like the crutches for the teachers. The teacher reads out the textbook, explains the meaning, quite often in the mother tongue of the student. The teacher cannot teach English without a textbook. We have tried this experiment in some states. The students also must be tested within the syllabus, not outside the portion, because the teachers are expected to only cover the portion, whatever that means. Even PhD degrees are given because a PhD degree is a must for a college assistant professor. So PhD degrees are manufactured. There is no correlation between a degree and the knowledge it's supposed to represent, whether it is MA, BA, MSc, BSc, whatever be the degree. It is just like getting a driving license in India. You need not know how to drive. You need not go for a test or you go to the RTO's office. You can easily get a license. Like that, you can easily get a degree. The killer graduates, like the killer drivers, are all over the place, and some of them are in the teaching profession. Only testing and maintaining records, manipulated records for the authorities. So only testing is privileged over teaching. These 7 dichotomies or sins have made the teaching of English a big joke. Then what else can be done? Is there no hope at all? Is there no redemption? Is the situation so hopeless? Not at all. I would think it is not at all hopeless. There is a lot of hope. After all, English has been with us for more than 150 years. Many Indians speak and write English, even creatively. Not only Radhakrishnan, Nehru, R.K. Narayan, Khushwant Singh, and many others, but even many others in the field of business, in the field of science, and in other public areas, we come across a number of excellent speakers of English, excellent writers of English. But what happens is they learn English outside the system, not in the classrooms of English. They learn English somehow. In order to raise the standards of teaching and learning English, the policy makers, administrators, educational institutions, managements, and teachers must first of all see the ground reality, and they must act accordingly. When English first came to India, it was spoken by the ruling class and also the people trained by the ruling class, the natives in the seats of grammar, in the seats of the government. English was an elitist language at that time, an urban phenomenon. English teaching was confined to the metro population with a view to forming a class of bureaucrats and clerks. This class still continues to rule and control education and the teaching of English. But with democracy, globalization, the RTE Act, compulsory universal education, the aspirations of the urban poor, rural and semi-urban population, English is no longer exclusive. It has become inclusive. More and more students come into education and they want to learn English. They understand that English is the language of opportunities, upward mobility. Using the old style curricula, methods and materials and even testing will not work for the inclusive system. Systems, whether they are ideas or values, keep changing. And what was developed for the earlier generations is not valid for all times to come. And English teaching is no exception. The one size fits all does not work at all. That kind of approach will not work for the present day generation. The learner profiles, teacher profiles, modern technology and market demands have undergone a sea change. So it has become necessary to think of alternatives. We think of alternatives in energy because petroleum resources are exhausted. We think of alternatives in medicine, Ayush for example, alternatives in technology, artificial intelligence, 4G, 5G, alternatives in fashion, alternatives in lifestyle. But we do not think of alternatives in education or alternatives in English teaching. We give a lot of importance to spoken English and communication skills, but all our examinations are in the written mode. Paradoxical. We don't give any importance to handwriting at all. The use of laptops, computers have destroyed handwriting. That is why even the court says our doctors must write the prescription using capital letters. On the one hand, we teach postmodernism, deconstruction, post-colonialism, gender studies, all only for the sake of examination. But we don't apply those ideas in our thinking or in framing curriculum. Isn't it rather funny? We try to teach high-flown English, high-flown literature to the students who cannot write even 2 or 3 sentences in basic English. And we give them degrees. And some of them have become teachers of English. This has been going on for years now. Another big flaw, I think, in the system is the top-down policy. Top-down was always the policy of the colonial masters. They never trusted Indians. Decisions were taken at the top level by the masters, and all others at the lower levels were ordered to implement the decisions. Textbooks are prescribed by the boards of studies, by the UGC, by the state councils. Publishers are also interested only in getting books prescribed. They lobby and get books prescribed because they are interested in profits. Managements are interested in 100% results. Nobody is interested in quality. I know quality exists only in some of the quality cells in the colleges and universities. Mahatma Gandhi, on the other hand, advocated bottom-up policy, Swaraj, empowering people at the grassroots level. It has political, economic, cultural implications. But it never happens. In the real sense, I mean. Autonomy is always on paper. The UGC or the State Council, the Vice Chancellor, the boards of studies, managements, these are the people at the top taking decisions. The teacher at the bottom level is only a foot soldier. Fire means fire. We must understand that unless we empower the teachers and make them professionally competent, make them more accountable, and involve them in their decision making, nothing substantial is going to happen. In the field of education or in the field of English teaching, mere paper degrees are not reliable. Professional competence is more important. The need for continuous pre-service training and in-service training is very important. Look at the colleges of education and their syllabus. Totally outdated. They are just degree selling shops. For example, look at the current situation. Teachers have been asked to do online teaching. No training whatsoever. The colleges of education have not thought about online teaching. Teachers are not given any training in online teaching. So we have to train them properly in order to improve quality in education. Even teachers' associations can do a lot of work. Associations are not meant only for asking for increased pay scales, better service conditions. The word service includes service to students also. They are our customers. They are our consumers. So teachers' unions can also take up teacher training and even materials production. My wife and I have prepared some books, maybe 20-25 books, based on the outline so far outlined. We have trained teachers and prepared materials. But 20 books or 25 books are not at all enough for this country. It has to be done on a massive scale, all over the country, in different regions, in order to change the colonial pattern. It has to be a massive operation. Let 1,000 flowers bloom and let there be 1,000 mutinies. Reverse the dichotomies. Give importance to Indian texts and global literature. Privilege non-white authors, non-canonical literature, spoken forms. Empower teachers, even empower students. You will find the situation is completely changed. You will see the light all over the place. Look around. There are hundreds of texts in every region in India. You have to be aware of these things. What is needed is a change in our mindset at all levels. Look at the ground realities and think, and don't ape the West. Make in India and go local is not just for the manufacturing sector. to make India self-reliant, even making education and English teaching, making them in India is very, very important, because education lays the very foundation for changing the mindset at all other levels. So, Make in India will succeed. Go local will succeed if we make education and teaching English in India. Let there be a sincere attempt to make education and teaching English in India, to free India from the Western mold. There is hope. Where there is will, there are 1,000 ways. Thank you very much for the patient listening. I would like to thank Dr. Bhaskaran Nair, Dr. Praveen, and particularly my son, Gopi Krishna Swami, for coming and doing the recording. Thank you all very much.